Hello, everyone. I am Anthropomantic Fiend, and welcome to Flights of Fancy. And this is going to be a slightly different episode of Flights of Fancy now that there's a formula or anything, what with there being only 3 episodes out by now. But the last 2 episodes were fantasy miniseries created by Hallmark, and I was reviewing them because there's a box set I'm working my way through. If you want the whole rundown on what the deal with that is, I have 2 reviews up already where I'm explaining that, but if you're new here, I usually do horror-related things on the internet, but this is my series dedicated to fantasy stuff. However, the movie I am reviewing today is not a fantasy movie whatsoever, but the fantasy adventure box set of 4 miniseries that I'm currently working my way through is fantasy adventure. So I have reviewed the 2 very legitimately fantasy-oriented movies on there, and now I'm assuming the last 2 are going to be adventure. At least I know one of them is, because that movie slash miniseries is the one I am reviewing today. And that is, of course, the Poseidon Adventure. And my understanding is this is a remake of a movie that came out in the 70s, or at least a readaptation of the book that movie is based on. Given what I've seen from this miniseries, I would very much like to go back and watch that movie because there are things I think it might do better. But this Poseidon Adventure is a mini-series that came out in 2005. It was directed by John Putch, who directed American Pie, The Book of Love, Tychus, and Atlas Shrugged Part 2. And it stars Adam Baldwin, who I know very well for playing Jane on Firefly, as well as its movie follow-up Serenity, for playing Hamilton on the last season of Angel, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer spinoff, which I just finished, and he was also in Full Metal Jacket. Alex Kingston, who was in Doctor Who, A Discovery of Witches, and The Widow. Rutger Hauer, who was in Blade Runner, Lady Hawk, and Hobo with a Shotgun. And Amber Sainsbury, who is in The Ferryman, The Purifiers, and 30 Days of Night. And the basic gist of this is big cruise ship departs on Christmas Day, and on New Year's Eve, there's been some explosives planted on the ship by terrorists. Said explosives get blown up, the ship starts to flood, and they have to figure out how to get off of the ship. All of the drama comes from the immediate we have to get off of this fucking ship, but also is built up to with a bunch of interpersonal drama and tension that has already been established prior. The score for this was done by Joe Kramer, who also did Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. A lot of folks who worked on sequels to iconic things working on this thing, as well as the TV show Femme Fatales and the 2006 vampire movie The Thirst, which may or may not be The Thirst that some people are thinking of, because there's a lot of vampire movies out there with samey titles, and I still haven't seen all of them. But I didn't think much of Kramer's score for this at first. It's very similar to a lot of things I've heard for a lot of things. It's very orchestral, though I suspect a lot of it was done with samples and synths, although it has sort of more of a sneaky spy vibe in places because one of the characters is a spy, and there's a bunch more sort of suspense thriller elements to this than it just being flat out big bombastic adventure. And there's a really obnoxious jingly happy Christmas thing that happens when people are getting onto the ship for Christmas Day, but it does do a few interesting things that I think are cool and interesting and kind of well done. For example, one of the leitmotifs that comes up a lot, not that it's the most memorable thing, is this kind of descending pentatonic thing that sounds vaguely sinister, and I think that evokes the way that the Poseidon is consistently sinking throughout the miniseries pretty well. My favorite thing that the score does is whenever we're with this rescue team that has finally figured out where the Poseidon is and is coming, the score is doing this dun 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 thing, which is Morse code for SOS. And I know this because Fable Cry actually did the same thing with the breakdowny part in their song Come Meet the Reapers, which I highly recommend. But it took me a while to pick up on it, but I was just like, that's a cool rhythm. I feel like I've heard this somewhere before, and then I was just like, oh, that's actually really smart. if you're not thinking about it, you're not going to pick up on that. But the way they've implemented Morse code for SOS into the score, I thought was really neat. One of the characters who's on the ship is also this big international pop star who is on some big competition and was either a finalist or won said competition, but she's supposed to be really popular. And there's a scene where she sings with the house band or resident band on the Poseidon, and I'm pretty sure the actress is lip syncing. The song's not the most mind blowing thing in the world, but it's a nice pop song. Singer has a good voice, and thematically, it's about, persevering through the hardest times possible, and nothing has bad has really happened yet, but there's already kind of this angst lying underneath it, and I think it foreshadows what's going to happen and kind of accents the tension that's already under the surface in not the most subtle way or the most amazing smart way, but I thought it highlighted that in a nice way and I liked it. Character wise, the first thing we're confronted with in this movie is the terrorists who are planting the bombs in the Poseidon. And I'm a bit iffy on it. Because, it also makes me really wonder what it is in the original Poseidon adventure, because my understanding is that's an iconic disaster movie. So is the sinking of the Poseidon in the original book and or the original movie an accident, or is it a terrorist attack like it is in this version? Because in this version, I really get the sense that they're harping on a lot of post 9/11 xenophobia with what they're doing, because yes, we were bombed by people from a foreign nation and it was horrifying and traumatizing. Not that I was born then, but it definitely changed the cultural landscape. And yes, that was a thing that happened. Yes, those were the people that did it, but that doesn't mean that every single terrorist that appears in a movie or a miniseries after that needs to be some foreign or non-white person who's a piece of shit with no redeemable qualities, because these aren't people the way they're portrayed. They try to give one of them a little bit of humanity later on, but that really just falls to pieces. These people are portrayed as pure evil, and I don't think there's a non-white skinned protagonist in this movie. I think every person whose skin is not white in this movie, with the exception of two very minor background characters, are all kind of just portrayed as monsters, and it's really icky. What I did like seeing in this movie was Adam Baldwin, because I watched Firefly earlier this year and had a lot of fun with it. And I very recently finished watching Angel, where he plays Hamilton. In Angel, he's clean shaven and he's wearing this suit, and he's this evil businessman who's like the ultimate representation and representative of Wolfram and Hart, who are like the ultimate symbolic corporate evil. In Firefly, he's another one of the ragtag main characters, albeit kind of the shittiest one, who's not doing that much to redeem himself, but does have some qualities. But in that one, he's got his scruffy beard, and that's kind of the exact look that Adam Baldwin as Mr. Rogo, I think his character has going here, except he is kind of wearing this suit. I don't know what business casual means, but if anything, that's what I guess Adam Baldwin's wearing for most of this movie. But the point of all of that is that I really couldn't see him as anybody other than Jane for the majority of the movie. He did seem a lot more heroic as this thing went on, but mostly I was just like, you're playing this exactly like Jane. And that's kind of what I love about it, because there's not a huge amount of development to his character. He's just kind of this highly trained spy who is just doing exactly what he needs to be doing at any given moment. Kind of cold and tough as nails and all of that. So my brain just kept injecting Jane's personality into it and making it into something different, because there wasn't a lot keeping me interested in this miniseries, to be honest. So I just kept seeing familiar faces and being like, ah, yes, I've decided that you are this character from this other thing that I like, and that's going to make this entertaining for me. But Adam Baldwin does deliver a good performance in this, I think. One of the main characters in this is also this kid who is immediately introduced by coming into his little suite with his family and immediately trying to get on the computer and pulling out his little video camera. And I mean, me too, but also he feels like he's just running off wherever he wants to and pointing a camera at everybody. And he just feels really annoying off of the bat. He just feels like the annoying kid character. And I really didn't like him initially, but I do feel like some of that was intentional, and I did grow to like him over the course of the miniseries. And I also think that was deliberate. So that was one of the things that they did really well, I think. And this kid also does want to be a film director when he grows up, so I did vibe with him a little bit more in that respect too. And he's trying to make a vampire movie, which, makes me like him a little bit more. And there's a couple scenes that I think are just really adorable. He's running around, he's gone into sort of the cooking area where all of the chefs are, and he's filming, I guess, establishing shots for his little movie. And one of the heads of catering just kind of bumps into him and is like, well, what do you think you're doing? And he's just like, I'm making the establishing shots for this movie. I'm building tension. I'm just filming normal things happening because that's going to freak people out, because they're just going to be expecting a vampire and they're not going to know where the vampire pops up. And he's just like, vampires, eh? Is that so? And he writes out a little note for the kid that's like his official authorization to film on the Poseidon, and hands it to him. And he's just like, I'm something of a passionate person for the arts. I used to be something of a thespian myself. And the kid looks up and grins at him. And at first I thought it was just going to be this weird thing where the kid's like, what's a thespian mean? But this kid's smart. So we immediately smash cut to this head of catering with, I'm assuming, just cheap fangs that he's just made out of like styrofoam or something that was handy. And he's just hamming it up as this vampire and biting into one of the waitresses. And then all of the cooking staff around them applaud. And the kid's like, all right, let's do another take just for protection, like very seriously. And they get into position again. And it's just very wholesome because we've got this kid's very legitimate passion for filmmaking, and then the entire like cooking and catering staff on the ship humoring this kid and helping him make his movie. And as someone who was always trying to make little homemade monster movies wherever I went as a kid, that was just really cute and wholesome and fun to see. There's also a group of just kind of sweet old people on the ship, one of whom is this old lady who I'll talk about a little bit more, and one of whom is this priest who I think is Rutger Hauer's character, although I don't remember what Rutger Hauer looks like off the top of my head, don't kill me. I had kind of mixed feelings on him. He was very sweet and very selfless and always trying to do the right thing, but he always put all of his trust in God and was hoping for a miracle, and whenever some chance that could save them arose, he was just like, God's provided us with a way out. And then there's a point where one of the characters like realizes that he has no idea where he's going or what he's doing. And it's just like, oh, maybe I put too much trust in God, but I'm only a person. And it's just like, this guy means well. It's very clear, but also when you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and yes, you're trying to hold on to hope, but you should also be realistic about the fact that you don't know where you're going so that you can figure it out somehow instead of just blindly marching forward. But yeah, I liked his character. He was kind of sad too. And this kid belongs to a full kind of nuclear family setup with a wife and a husband and an older sister. And the mom is like the creator of this very popular clothing line, or like owns a bunch of chain stores for that clothing line. And the husband is kind of trying to be a burgeoning novelist, but feels kind of, I don't know, unfulfilled, or just like there's nothing there for him. And you just immediately get the sense that there's all this tension going on with this unhappy family, and he ends up starting an affair with the woman who massages him one time on the ship. What kind of sets him off is the fact that she brought kind of her business partners and advisors, I guess, these two other women with her on the ship, and he was just like, oh, they're more important than me? Why didn't you tell me this? And it's just like, ugh. But we don't have any establishment that that's who those characters are supposed to be, or that she's this big fashion person. When he says that, there's just kind of this implied resentment when he sees that these other two women are with her on the ship. So my queer brain was immediately just like, oh, is there like a lesbian polycule happening here? And I was very wrong about that. I didn't expect to be right about that, but then I was just like, what is the tension here? What is the relationship with these other two women that she's just kissed on the cheek and he's looking unhappy about? Oh, business partners. Because I'm me and I can't be stopped, I kept headcanoning it that way anyway. But there's this whole kind of affair and impending divorce, unhappy family subplot happening that did create tension, but was kind of my least favorite part of the miniseries. It was kind of just annoying to me. And then we find out that Mr. Rogo, Adam Baldwin's character, is a little bit racist. And it is very much, again, harping on that post 9/11 xenophobia stuff. He's literally just like, there's more people on the staffing of this ship from foreign nations than there has been on any others in a long time. So I'm extra suspicious and I need to keep an eye out. And it's just like, please just stop. It just bothers me. I really hate it. Especially because they never acknowledge the fact that that might be racist. The movie's just kind of okay with that and it's just like, yes, foreign people, always just evil monster terrorists, no redeeming qualities. And I hate it. I don't really need to say more about that. I just hate it. It also really just seems like he's very bad at being undercover. They make a very big deal about this other person on the ship knowing about his undercover identity and him immediately going and, threatening one of the other officials on the ship at gunpoint to tell him who else he told. We get him speaking into his little thing and being like, the only people who my identity has been let slip to are sufficiently contained. But then he immediately kind of blows his cover as soon as shit hits the fan a little later, or as soon as they find a body on the ship before the explosion even happens. So they really make a big deal out of that in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I guess it does set up this other official guy as an unreliable person who's going to put a wrench in everyone's plans and thinks too much of himself. If that's even the same character I'm thinking of, because I can't remember. I also really like the character of Shelby. She has this little awkward romance with one of the medics on the ship, I think it is. I could kind of go either way on that. I don't really care. But she's planning to go into medical school. She's training to be a nurse. She has all this medical knowledge that ends up proving really valuable. And she feels like the most truly fleshed out female character in the story and the most proactive one too. So the bar was not that high, but she was well acted, as were the other female characters, but they just weren't very fleshed out or that well written, in my opinion. Yeah, she just had the most to do in the movie, so I liked her. And one of the few non-white protagonists that I mentioned in this who has barely any screen time at all is one of the people who's kind of working at the place where they get signals in from the ship. I don't know what his position's called or what that place is called, but he's the one who's trying to find the Poseidon or get a distress signal from them or anything. But he's played by Perry Shin, who is the guy who just keeps showing up as different characters over and over again in the Hatchet movies until, Hatchet 3 and then Victor Crowley when he shows up as the same character twice. But it was really funny to be like, oh, it's Perry Shin again, and he's playing a completely different character, which was only really funny because it was the same series. But I just really like him as an actor. He does not have nearly as much to do in this as he does in Hatchet, but it was fun to see him again and finally thinking he gets to relax on New Year's Eve and then being like, oh shit, I've got to deal with this sinking ship. And it's just like, poor Perry Shin just can't catch a break. I like him as an actor. He has basically nothing to do in this, but I was delighted by his presence nonetheless. The mother in the family, on the other hand, I really didn't love her characterization, mostly because she tries to say a bunch of motivational things throughout the movie, and it's always something that's just like, you're either with us or against us, or you don't really have any choice, you're just gonna have to tough up and do it. And it feels like this really just aggressive, pushy, more stress-inducing thing to say. And yes, it's the honest thing to say, but they make it sound, especially with like the score playing under it, like the most inspired, motivational, heartfelt thing ever. And it honestly just sounds like her being like, just like, suck it up, you wimp, and just go and do the thing. And then the person will just be like, oh, thank you. Like the old lady who I mentioned before was just like, that's exactly the sort of thing my husband would say. You're such an inspiration. And it's just like, no, she's being a realist, but she's kind of being really blunt and kind of a dick about it. So why are you treating this as so inspirational? She's just kind of annoying to me. Why is this your idea of what inspirational is? It's not like she's even saying it in an inspirational way either. It's just kind of like how they're taking it. It feels very blunt and disheartening the way she's saying it to me. So I didn't love that. I get what they were doing with the shitty I'm in charge official guy before. It's kind of the same thing they do with Principal Savage in Anna and the Apocalypse. Not to bring up my favorite movie again, or one of my favorite movies, but the movie that I push in everybody's face all the time. Go watch Anna and the Apocalypse right now, please. I know it's a Christmas movie, but watch it. But in that, once the apocalypse hits, Savage is holding on to every little bit of authority he still has and kind of rubbing that in everyone's faces, and it kind of makes him into a villain character. But Savage is already well established at the beginning of Anna and the Apocalypse. This guy, maybe we saw him once earlier, but I really have no idea who he is or what kind of authority he's supposed to have. So he feels kind of superfluous. It's not totally clear how he's managing to hold all of these people there, because even Savage, when he's trying to hold on to his headmaster status, even though he hasn't even become the headmaster yet, it's clear that he can't manage all of these panicked people. I don't understand why this large group of people is deciding to stay with this guy, or are intimidated enough by him to stay. It's just like there's this one person keeping all of these people down here, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. His character does help plot stuff. He's not completely unnecessary, but he isn't established or executed as well as I would have liked. And he's also kind of annoying, but that's kind of the point of his character. And yeah, we later on then find out that Jane has a little bit of a soft spot. I'm calling him Jane because that's the name of his character in Firefly, and I'm going to keep doing that. But Adam Baldwin's character does have a brief moment where you think he's going to make another like note in his little audio journal or record of his spy doings, but it's actually just a little note to his wife. But it's kind of funny because right before he's going to say like anything tender at all, like, you know, I love you, or the last thing I'm going to see when I die is going to be your face, he just pauses and he like scrunches up his face a little bit, and he's just like, oh no, I'm too manly and tough. I can't possibly say anything vulnerable. And then it finally comes out of his mouth in this slightly half-assed but still genuine way. And it's good acting, but it's kind of funny to me. And then Miss Rosen, who's the old lady I mentioned before, has maybe two well-established character traits, which are that she's Jewish and that she has a husband named Manny, or did have a husband named Manny, and she will refer to things that her late husband Manny did or said all the time. But I absolutely love her. She's one of the sweetest and most spunky characters in the movie, and she's the only one whose kind of judgment of the terrorists that they caught on the ship, who they are keeping alive, by the way, doesn't feel xenophobic, because there's a point where she's just like, my husband Manny always used to say that there are no bad people in this world. Only people who have been driven to do terrible things because something terrible has happened to them. And I just want to know what terrible thing happened to you to make you do something like this. And they really end up just using that as a moment for him to say jack shit and then just be an asshole later and just say other cryptic nonsense and not be humanized whatsoever. But she is, again, the only character whose judgment of the terrorists just feels like, why are you like this? Why are you hurting us? And it doesn't feel like a xenophobic, foreigner evil thing. And this is a good moment to, 30 minutes into this thing, say this is 100% a spoilery review. So if you haven't seen this, it's long, it's a time commitment. But if you do not want it spoiled for you, I'm about to go into some spoiler territory. So go watch it, come back, because she dies. And a lot of the tension in this movie really happens for me because I don't want her character to die. And she's a little bit of a frail old woman. So she's like climbing these really rickety ladders that she doesn't have the best grip on, and it's really stressful. Or then there's a scene where she has to swim underwater for an extended period of time to get to the right place, and it's just like her heart's beating a mile a minute. She's getting dizzy, she can't breathe properly, and she ends up making it. But even though she makes it, once she gets to the other side, her heart eventually just kind of gives out and she just kind of dies from overexertion. But she has this little monologue and she asks Rutger Hauer to describe home to her and all this beautiful stuff. And it's just one of the most legitimately emotionally wrenching moments in the miniseries that kind of almost did bring tears to my eyes, but they also killed like the best character in this. So I wasn't too, enthused about that. But it was effectively done. And one of the moments in this thing where it really feels like you can do everything right and still misfortune can happen and someone's heart can give out and it can be really sad. It's the one moment where I feel like this thing really does show what dire circumstances can do and just the gritty reality of something like this. So, well done. I am miserable now and I kind of hate it, but I also love it. Well done. Story-wise, I do appreciate that they've built in these tensions very kind of methodically before everything goes to shit, which happens pretty close to the end of part one, actually. So they've spent most of the hour and a half of part one of this thing building up tension, kind of like what the Hallmark Merlin's Apprentice that I just reviewed did. But again, the affair plotline, the unhappy family on the brink of divorce plotline was very much my least favorite part of this movie. I just kind of didn't care about it, and it really feels like a lot of the other characters, namely the kids, don't care that much either. Very specifically, the son is just like, when the mom tries to apologize for what's happening around him, he's just like, there's nothing to be sorry for. You two just don't want to be together anymore, which I'm guessing isn't entirely true in the movie's eyes. There's this kind of idea that, again, feels very Hallmarky to me of, oh, they're going to ultimately wind up together again and all this is going to be resolved and everything's going to be the natural order again. But I really got the sense to me that the kid, even if the movie's like, no, he's lying to himself, he is upset about this, is actually just like, yeah, no, you guys don't want to be together. There's nothing to apologize about. If you guys don't want to be together, you're not going to be together. Why am I supposed to be upset about that? So I actually kind of liked that, even if it isn't supposed to be what I'm taking it as. I also just wrote down the fact that the terrorist code word is Trident, and honestly, yeah, I know you're keeping it thematically relevant, but could you not think of a better code word? You're literally on the Poseidon. What is that? That's gonna give you away so easily, unless you're trying to do the hiding in plain sight thing again, and it kind of works, but honestly, Trident, do better. Also, when shit hits the fan, the husband and the wife he's cheating on hear the rumble and then just go back to kissing, and until literally the room is falling apart around them, they have done actually nothing, and it takes them this really long slog to get back to the rest of the main characters, and it's just like, why are you still kissing? If you hear a big rumble and you're on a boat, you should worry. But I'm still just kind of mad at that plot line in general, so There's also a moment where Shelby is kind of stuck up on the ceiling, which is now the floor because the boat is overturned, and she's up there with these aerial performers they had before, and someone down on the grounds, after they've kind of put this blanket out as like a safety net, is just like, aerial performer, why don't you jump first and show her how it's done? And it's just like, they're an aerial performer. They do this for a living. How is this going to make her feel easier about this at all? Just a little detail, but it was just kind of like, how is this helping at all? Like, I know just showing that someone can do it, great, but this person does this professionally. How is this going to put her at ease at all? And then once shit does hit the fan, this does get gnarly and dark in the way the things I've reviewed so far does not. Again, this is a much more realistic story, much more of a kind of disaster film type thing. But again, it was a made-for-TV thing from Hallmark, so I wasn't expecting it to get as honestly gritty as it does. There's a lot of just sudden, meaningless death and gnarly destruction of bodies and just dark stuff that happens in this. One of which is the discovery of a faceless body early on the ship that is one of the first things that alerts people to the fact that something is wrong. But I don't think they ever establish who the faceless body was supposed to be. They just use it as kind of into the fact that something's afoot. But I was kind of expecting that to be a detail that's paid off in some way, and it just isn't, so... And again, it's doing the kind of disaster or apocalypse or just dire circumstances movie thing where I'm just like, so this is supposed to tell us something about each of these characters, and it is doing that. in a little bit of an on-the-nose way. But it just made me wonder, is this supposed to show, like, how dire circumstances show people's true selves? Or is it supposed to show how it changes the person that they are? I get the sense that it's more showing the true selves, but it kind of made me wonder that about a lot of other stories. And I guess in some others, it's also just like the people who can't accept change and are stuck in the past and die because of that, or the people who adapt to survive. But it just made me wonder what they were trying to say about these characters with the impending disaster that's going to smash them all. And it does tell us just a little bit of background about each of the characters and kind of open them up and make them more vulnerable. But it doesn't really feel like it knows what it's trying to do with each of the characters. And I'm still a little bit lost and honestly not that into this. So also because I know the original book came out, I'm assuming, even earlier, and this is also a readaptation of a story that was first adapted in the 1970s. I think they implement modern technology into this pretty well. Like the kid's video camera, he actually uses it to document a lot of things that are happening, kind of a lot in places where it feels insensitive, but people are like, no, this is for posterity. People need to know what happened, and they just go with it. But they weave it into the story in a way that seems decent, and also they're able to shoot a distress email that gets things out to the authorities in a way that I'm sure was not in the original because they didn't have that kind of technology, but it feels, woven into the story really well, actually. And that movie element feels like they might be trying to do something meta with it, but I honestly don't know. There's also like this part where the aforementioned pop star and her boyfriend there, who's like this big TV producer, like makes a deal with the kid to be like, okay, yeah, you keep filming everything. We're going to make a TV special out of this and I'll give you 10% of the profit. And it's just like, oh, you're validating this kid's filmmaking dreams and you're also recording something for posterity, but it also still feels like you're kind of profiting off of him. So it was kind of cute, but still kind of iffy. I don't know. But there's also a moment in the midst of all of this where aforementioned pop star girlfriends, they have to use like cloth for something. So she just like strips out of her outerwear and like is briefly just in like a bikini and her underwear. And the kid immediately turns on the camera and starts filming her. And the mom's just like, without even looking at him, just pushes the camera down. And it's just like in the middle of this absolutely horrifying, devastating experience, the worst and stupidest moment for like a random male gazy strip tease and like a crappy joke about it ever. It's just like, not that there's a lot of great places for that anyway, but just the most inopportune time for a joke, let alone a joke like that. It's just like, what are you trying to do here? And then there's also the thematic thing happening of, should I stay in this one place where I seem safe, or should I go out there to try to get help because that way at least I'm trying to do something, because there's no certainty of safety out there. This feels safe and enclosed, but there's also no guarantee of safety in here. And it's that dilemma that's in everything from The Lord of the Rings to the Carmilla web series to Night of the Living Dead. Anything where there's a dire, huge circumstance enclosing on people has that kind of conflict in it. So it's nothing new. I realized how prevalent that was as I was watching this, and I just thought it was neat. And then towards the end of this thing, just the sheer number of like obstacles that people are circumventing and just emotional monologuing that's happening does start to kind of drag. It's just a lot, and it feels like it could have been condensed into a shorter movie, which I'm assuming the original movie is, so it's probably better. And they literally have to walk over like this pit of flames towards the end, and the girl that the husband is having an affair with ends up like falling in, and it feels like this really big punishment for her, even though it's like an accident, but she's just like freaking out, and it still feels like just this circumstantial punishment of her character for sleeping with the husband, and it just feels off to me, and it feels like, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and it's just, yes, they did a shitty thing, but holy shit. And she's just kind of on the receiving end of all of this hate and horror and just awfulness for the entire thing. And it's just like, y'all are trying to survive together and do what you need to do, but you're still casting your dirty looks and being like, you're a horrible human being. And yes, you did do something shitty, but oh my god, it's a lot. Effects-wise, there's a minimal use of not great looking CGI. I honestly have no thoughts in it. I really just don't care. It doesn't look great, but I don't care. There are some like practical blood and gore effects, including one moment where someone's arm is broken and there's a bit of bone sticking out, and Shelby has to kind of reset his arm, I guess. And he's just like, you can hear the sound of it and you can see the bone sticking out, and it's just gnarly. It's a lot to look at, and it's really well done. And also just the fact that they had to do all of this practical water flooding stuff. Yeah, some of it's CG, but a lot of it is actual water flooding these sets. And there's also the fact that they had to build what feels like the whole set for an actual cruise ship and then go and build the set for that entire thing but upside down. Feels very impressive to me. Like, how did you manage to do all of that, especially on what feels like a relatively tight budget? And then there's a lot of real fire that's also implemented, and that practical stuff is done really good. But then there's also like CG fire mixed in with that. And then there's just some like sudden deaths that happen at points. Like someone goes up in flames and it's clearly CGI. And then there's points where people get like dragged underwater by, I guess, the current, but it almost looked like there could be a sea monster down there. And it feels like there's just random, not great CGI being implemented, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be looking at. And it's just like, oh, yes, nature killed them, but how? What am I looking at? It's very confusing. And that's kind of all my thoughts on this one. If you couldn't tell, I wasn't as enthused about this one as I was about the others. It's not really my genre, for one thing, but I would actually like to get into more disaster movies, maybe better than this. And I did like to see Adam Baldwin and Rutger Hauer, and most of the cast does a decent job. I just think it suffers from, one, having to be a mini-series. It feels like they're trying to draw these two sections out to an hour and 30 minutes when they don't really need to be. And also just the writing doesn't feel very strong to me, and the CGI isn't that great. So I wouldn't say you have to watch this, but if you're intrigued by the cast or you want to compare this to the original Poseidon adventure book or movie, I would say check it out. It's probably available somewhere for not much. Again, I bought the box set at a nearby store for like 50 cents. But yeah, check it out if you want to. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I didn't hate it either. There are some things that I thought it did pretty well. But I'm also just kind of generally tired right now, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt for that reason. That is my review of the Poseidon adventure. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!